and welcome to He Say, She Say Family Coach Live. Um, Let me attempt to work here in the comments, and hopefully you can hear me out there. So if you can hear me, please give me a thumbs up or some type of response that I can be heard. All right. So today we are going to be talking about um, an actual family situation. Welcome in, welcome in. Are you able to hear? Uh, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Welcome, welcome in. So I'm actually going to be mediating a situation from the standpoint of talking about both perspectives. And this is a very serious topic. And, one of the things that I have to admit in my world is that we kind of get used to seeing bad things happen a lot. And because of that, we don't always take the time to digest the very personal feelings that are involved. And so a couple of months ago, I was at about 6 to 9 months ago, I began to notice a growing trend in my actual caseload concerning alcoholism and substance abuse. And what's really heartbreaking about it is how many people are struggling, suffering silently, not talking about it, embarrassed about life with an alcoholic or a drug abuser. And so tonight's episode, yes, I'm going to be mediating both perspectives, the perspective of the spouse who is the alcoholic and the perspective of the spouse living with an alcoholic or with someone who is struggling through drug addiction or alcoholism. And just having this conversation from the standpoint of helping us to understand some insight and some perspective. So whether it's you or someone that you know and love and care about who is dealing with these things, know that you could be talking every day to someone who's suffering silently at home with a spouse that is an addict. You could be working every day with someone who is a functional alcoholic. And this situation is very painful, not only for the spouse who's not using, but for the spouse who is using. There's definitely something at work. So let me tell you about Mr. H. Mr. H is in his late 30s. He had been married to his wife for about 8 years. And together, as a part of their dating and their life together as a couple, they would go to social events and drink. Drinking is a really social event. In some sectors of our society, you're weird. If you show up to a party or an engagement and you don't have an alcoholic beverage in your hand, it's hard for me to relate because I'm not a drinker. I'd rather have my calories as some chocolate cake or something like that. But you are considered a square in some social situations if you're not drinking. When you're doing business networking, sometimes it's expected that you are drinking. And so of course, in their dating life, they drank together. After they married, they socialized and drank together. But what ended up happening about 5 years into their marriage, Mrs. H lost her child in a tragic killing. This unexpected, life-changing event. And to cope with her grief, she turned to drinking more often, not just in social situations, and drinking more heavily. And for some period of time, Mr. H was understanding. I mean, oh my gosh, you just experienced a tragic loss, unexpected. This is life changing. This is, in fact, life shattering. And he was very devoted and very sensitive to his wife's pain and was there for her as she was navigating her grief. But what ended up happening after a couple of years of her managing through her loss, she wasn't getting better. She was actually becoming worse. Whereas he was the type of drinker, he would drink and he would become more laid back. He was a happy drunk. She was the exact opposite, and she was a violent drunk. She became argumentative and even physical at times. And so he had finally decided that he was going to establish some boundaries. And, we're going to talk a little bit about some coping skills. Again, hoping to support and reach out to folk who may be struggling with this issue. Again, from the standpoint of a person who, I'm here in a divorce firm. My goal is, by talking about these things, maybe we can reverse engineer this. Maybe we can start talking about these things before it's too late. Maybe by knowing that you're not the only one, you don't completely lose hope and throw in the towel. So I just want to kind of keep that in mind, because alcohol and drug abuse is not just an issue that women deal with their husbands. It's husbands dealing with this issue with their wives as well. And that's why I'm telling you Mr. H's story. Because after about 3 years of his wife going deeper and deeper into this place of self-medicating herself to cope with her grief, well, he put his foot down and he established a boundary. And he said to her, he was like, if you take another drink, I don't think our marriage can make it, because the fighting had it was just too much. The up and down, the conflict, her violent fits during, her drunken passion. And he said, it's either me or the booze. And so she agreed that she was no longer going to drink. And she apparently kept her word for some period of time, maybe about a month or two. And then there was this one night she came home really late. He was already in bed, and she showed up having been sneaking drinks over at a girlfriend's house. And she started a fight with him when she got home. And this fight escalated to the point where she had him arrested for domestic violence after she had awakened him out of his sleep, being physically violent towards him. So this thing escalated actually into, a criminal matter. And that was just the end of it for him. And that was the end of their marriage. And so I want to talk about it. And keep in mind, if you have a friend or a loved one or an experience that you would like to share about how destructive alcoholism is, how destructive drug abuse is to a family, please feel free. Give me a call. Share your story. Let's talk about the perspective, because here the question becomes, how long should Mr. H have tolerated his wife addiction? Should he have given her another 6 months, 12 months, 2 or 3 years? I mean, for crying out loud, this was the death of her child. At what point was it long enough? Right? So let's look at a couple of things that are the top reasons how drug abuse and alcohol abuse destroy a relationship. The number one thing is trust. So what I see a lot in marriages that involve alcohol or drug abuse is manipulation. And why is that? What do people say when you point out to them, like, hey, look, you're acting like this because of your weed. You're acting like this because of the alcohol. You're acting like this because of whatever the gummies you're eating. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to defend. They're going to defend that it's not the drinking. It's not the gummies. It's not my weed. You're just overreacting. So addictive behavior is always going to protect the addiction, right? And when we're looking at what the addiction is, you're escaping into something. This is my escape. This is my comfort blanket. This is my place that I turn for refuge. But Am I right or am I wrong here, y'all? When you're talking about your marriage, how does it feel to be confronted with the fact that your spouse is more comforted by their drink or by their smoke than they are comforted by your presence and by your warmth and your concern? What do you say about that? Do you care? Does it not matter? Is it good for your spouse to be more comforted by something other than you so you don't have to be bothered? What do you think? And so these trust issues with the manipulation, it leads to a breakdown in communication. That's the next thing that's happening in the marriage, because this person is going to be defending their addiction. This person is going to be defending this thing that gives them a place to escape. This person is looking for that comfort. And if you are attacking their comfort, if you are attacking the one thing that they feel like is their trusted best friend, do you expect them to be open and welcoming about that? There's also going to be the financial strain in a marriage that's struggling through alcoholism and or addiction. And I've seen firsthand the games that people play with the money in order to make provision for their addiction. We had a lady who called about a very long-term addiction situation that created a lot of instability for their family because her husband would just not pay the bills. They had been evicted several times because the money went to the drugs rather than to the household. And in fact, when she got the courage to confront him and say, "Hey, you can't keep doing this to me and to our children," he was so committed to his drug addiction, he said to his wife, "Leave if you want to. And if you want child support, try to catch me if you can." Letting her know he was going to do whatever he had to do to protect his addiction and to protect his money, because that's how far gone this addiction was. So the financial strain is real, especially when you're looking at drugs and drug use. And so now the emotional distance begins for both spouses because there's obviously a third party involved in this marriage. Your drink is like the other woman, or your drink is like you having a side piece boyfriend, or your drug addiction is like your lover that you love more than me. You love this thing more than you love me. You love it so much that you don't even care that you might be willing to lose me. You might lose me for this. The addiction becomes the other person, another lover, and it creates emotional distance, tearing away at the trust. Again, unpredictability. Now, with the exception of maybe, a happy drunk, someone who just gets sloppy and just kind of passes out on the couch, no fight, no fuss. Alcoholism creates a lot of unpredictability. And so for the spouse who's like sitting here and losing their husband or losing their wife to this addiction, doesn't know who they're dealing with from day to day. When I talk to men and women in this situation, they are describing a type of PTSD, this trauma response of not knowing who they are going home to deal with today. Some days he's a really, really wonderful guy, and other days I don't know who he is. Well, with Mr. H, he never knew from day to day if he was going to come home and have a fight with Mrs. H, or if he was going to have to, she was just going to be the regular person that he'd love to come home to. And when you're married to somebody, part of what makes your marriage peaceful is knowing who you're married to. And alcohol and drugs steals that from you. Now, one of the biggest issues is codependency. And in codependency, when you are the spouse, so what was happening with Mr. H was that he was so into taking care of her, so into making sure he was the loving husband and he was the supportive husband, so into being concerned about what she needed, that he lost touch with himself and he began to lose himself in the relationship. And this is a really, really big indicator that you or someone who you know is deteriorating as a result of an addiction issue in their marriage, because they are letting go of themselves and they are no longer taking care of themselves because they are so concerned about this person's well-being. Oh, well, I understand that he's fragile right now. That's what Mr. H was doing. He was understanding that his wife was hurting. He was understanding that she was needing to escape her pain. In fact, like even the scriptures, the Bible in the book of Proverbs says that you give a heavy drink to someone who has a heavy heart so that they can forget their pain. But the trap for a husband with an alcoholic wife or a wife that's addicted to drugs is that if you're focusing on her more than you're focusing on yourself, you are enabling her to continue in her behavior without any accountability. And vice versa, if you are a wife and you are supporting a husband, you understand that he's hurting, you're understanding that there's some dark and secret things that he's not ready to open up to you about. He's drowning them in the bottom of a bottle, but you're losing yourself trying to support him. That is where the codependence factor happens in these situations that we see here on the divorce side of my world. And that neglect, you are neglecting yourself trying to support your alcoholic partner or your drug addicted partner, but your drug addicted partner is now neglecting things that they should be responsible for in the marriage. They're neglecting taking care of you. They're neglecting putting your needs ahead of their own needs. They're neglecting paying for bills and things like I was talking about with the financial situation. This is what begins to wear on the person who's not addicted. This lack of trust, the neglect, and now the codependency. And one of the big ones, y'all, obvious, the physical and the mental abuse that takes place. If you're dealing with someone who just turns into a doggone Tasmanian devil when they're drunk or high, it's going to erupt in you getting cursed out or maybe even physically hurt. It's a very, very common thing that we see in domestic violence situations, that connection between drug abuse and alcohol abuse. Isolation. Many alcoholics and people who are struggling through drug addiction, they isolate themselves and they withdraw. They withdraw from social activities. They withdraw from their own families. They withdraw from their partners and alienate themselves, and just making that distance that has already been happening as a result of the manipulation, the loss of trust. I don't know who you are from day to day. It becomes an entire emotional hurricane. And then finally, just all of these things lead to a breakdown in intimacy. Well, you no longer know who you're married to. You no longer know if they're going to be ready to fight or if they're going to be good today. You no longer know whether or not they're going to take care of their financial responsibilities, whether or not they're going to be willing to listen to you and care for your needs. You are no longer sure whether or not they're lying to you to cover up the addiction. They're telling you that they're getting clean, they're cleaning up their act, they're going to get counseling, they're going to AA, they're going to to meetings and getting support, they're getting therapy, but really they're secretly continuing to hide and nurse this other relationship that they have with this addiction. There's just a complete breakdown of intimacy. And for most people, I mean, am I right or am I wrong here? Can you be intimate with someone you cannot trust? Do you feel loved if you cannot trust this person? Do you feel loved if this person has this addiction that's clearly or obviously more valuable than you are? At least that's what most of our families who are dealing with this issue, that's the question that they're asking themselves. So from Mr. H's perspective, he had given his wife long enough. She had 3 years to grieve the loss of her child. What do you think? Is 3 years long enough when your spouse is hurting because of a sudden death in the family? Because of a life changing circumstance that maybe they turn to alcohol for a season? How long is long enough? How long is too long? What are your thoughts? Give me a one if you think that 3 years is long enough. And so I want to talk about the loss of her child from the standpoint of Mrs. H. Because at the point that 3 years is long enough, at the point where her child passed away tragically, suddenly, unexpectedly, she was in a twilight zone, right? 3 years was too long. She was in the twilight zone. This is her baby. Now, most of us, if you've lived long enough, you've experienced the loss of a loved one. How long do you need to grieve when it's a child? Every year when that child's birthday comes around, she is re-experiencing the loss of her child. Every time the sporting event that her child used to play every year is time for the seasonal sign up, she's missing her child. In fact, she's so in pain about the child that passed away, she's lost sight of her child that she shared with Mr. H. And so, from her standpoint, this was a crippling loss. How could she continue to live in light of such a loss? So, me personally, having worked with Mr. H, having heard his demeanor, that's a really good point. So let's talk about this one right here, because this one hits on your spouse, and this one hits on other people, not just your spouse, but your other kids. So we've actually seen this situation before where the child who died continues to have a bigger presence and a bigger impact on the day-to-day life of your family than the children who are still alive. And so you have others you need to continue to live for. I think this is a great comment and a great point when you're talking about what this woman was experiencing in the aftermath of her child's loss. She began to lose sight that her husband still needed her. She continued to lose sight of how her behavior was affecting her husband. And the death of a child, you will never forget that. So, are you saying here, I can't give a stopping of grief? No, but what about the alcohol? I think that you will always miss your child. I think you will always feel that emptiness of your child being gone. How long do you medicate? How long do you escape your pain? Through the alcohol. I think that this is a very fair comment from the standpoint of you are always going to forget the child that you lost. But what about the fact that we're all escaping something, right? So, I'll be honest about this. If we all take a very close look at ourselves, we all have something that we escape to. So for me, it's not alcohol and it's not drugs, but I tell you what my escape is. Cheesecake, cheese, and chocolate, right? So if I'm feeling overwhelmed, and if I just want that momentary, like piece of pleasure, just like an escape from the stresses of the day, I will turn to some cheesecake, some cheese, or some chocolate. And a lot of times we look at things like that, and it's like, oh yeah, everybody has their little thing, but why is alcohol or drugs any different? Isn't it just more of an extreme type of impact on the family, or impact on your health, or impact on your mental health? But you can say the same thing about my cheese, right? So if I'm turning to cheese every day, and I'm eating cheese like it's going out of style, eventually it's going to start affecting my health. It's going to start affecting the way that I feel about myself. It's going to start affecting the way that I look to my spouse. It's going to start affecting the way that I feel. I'm not going to be able to climb stairs without huffing and puffing and breathing and lose my breath, right? So, something as benign, we give a pass on food, but similar to the alcohol and to the drugs, it's an escape. So this woman was escaping her pain. This woman was seeking a way to get out of her situation, and she is never going to forget, because this was the death of her child. But how long was too long for her to continue to turn to the bottle, to the point where no one else was alive, nobody else's life mattered but the life that was lost. And I don't know that any of us are in a position to actually say how long would have been long enough. But I could say this. Mr. H was crying out to his wife. He had taken vows to her to love her and to be with her for the rest of his life. And when it got to the point where he came to her and he brought to her how much this thing was hurting him, and she was unable to hear him, in my judgment, that is when it had gone on too long. When he felt the need to come to her and say to her, I can't keep doing this, that is when it has been too long. When we are not hearing the people that are in our home saying, I have needs too. Yes, we're supposed to be long suffering. Yes, we're supposed to be understanding. Yes, we're supposed to be patient. But at what point do you no longer get to voice your needs to your spouse who has completely escaped into their own grief and their own loss? And so on this note, I want to share a couple of coping strategies, because this conversation is really about support. There are untold numbers of men and women every single day dreading to leave the office because they know that they're going home to a spouse who's been drinking and who is no longer the person that they fell in love with. And so here are a couple of things. I would say that one of the top things that I want to offer is for you to seek support. When you are dealing with issues of addiction and alcoholism, you do not need to be by yourself. You do not need to be an island. And one of the biggest things, but especially for the Black community, because you know how we are, family, you don't want everybody in your business, right? Black folks, we're like, we're the last ones to come out and say to somebody, hey, look, I'm struggling, I'm hurting, this is what's going on, because you don't want anybody in your business. You were taught early in your life, don't be putting my business out in the streets and don't be telling nobody my business. And so we take on that same attitude when it comes to suffering silently at home with something as serious, as pervasive, and as destructive as alcoholism and drug abuse. And I want to say right now to you, my family, Black community here in the United States, in the diaspora, we have to support each other through stuff like this. There are groups of people with shared traumas where you can come and you can talk and you can unpack. The act of sitting in a group of people with a shared experience who know exactly what you're going through, who knows exactly what you're describing. You don't even have to explain it in detail because they're living through it just like you are, where you get to go and share, and you get to go and cry on somebody's shoulder, and you get to go and say, man, it was just really hard this week. Just the act of doing that is bringing healing to your situation. Now, let me see what one of these Black folks talk about their business. Keep my business out your mouth. Black folks creed. This is the Black folks creed. And look, I'm not here telling you to put your business in the streets, and I'm definitely not going to co-sign on anybody repeating somebody else's business because it's a juicy morsel or tidbit of gossip, like, oh, you know what so-and-so going through. No. But when you are dealing with people in a professional support environment, a safe support environment, I don't care if it's only 2 or 3 people in the support group, talking about that shared experience that you are living and married to someone with alcoholism or drug abuse is one of the most important coping mechanisms you can put in place if you are choosing to stick it out and continue to pray for your spouse. Another one is setting boundaries. So, particularly with the codependent piece, where you're kind of like trying to be there to rescue this person, to be this person's savior, and then you're just continuing to enable bad behavior. You have to recognize the part that you're playing in allowing this person to continue in their bad behavior. And you're going to have to say, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore, and I'm not doing that anymore. I recognize where I have allowed you to misbehave, and I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not going to continue to sit here and just keep covering things up for you. I'm not going to keep cleaning up the mess that you're making. I'm not going to keep trying to protect you from being exposed, because that's a lot of energy when you're going in to cover up, the mess. Because number one, you don't want your husband or your wife to be embarrassed by this behavior. But the other thing too, Black folks, we don't want our business out in the streets. That's exhausting. And setting boundaries, if you have been the one who's been rescuing your spouse and not allowing your spouse to feel the consequence of their behavior, it's time to start setting some boundaries. Another coping mechanism is to practice self-care. Again, codependence also includes neglecting yourself, neglecting your own needs, no longer taking care of yourself because you're so busy trying to save this other person. You're so busy trying to cover the other person's shortcomings. You're so busy trying to fix what this other person has neglected as a result of their alcoholism. You have to take time to take care of yourself, especially when you have kids. When you have kids, unfortunately, if you're the spouse that's dealing with and managing, this other person and their addiction, you got to show up for the kids. This is exactly what was happening with Mr. H. Mr. H was having to be the adult every time his wife showed up home drunk and acted out like a toddler. He had to be the one to teach their child this isn't okay, and put their child in a safe space where he could parent their child, because his wife was just belligerent and out of control. He had to continue to make sure that this child had some sense of stability. This child continued to have one parent that could be relied upon to be consistent. And that can be exhausting. So you definitely want to continue to take care of yourself, especially when you're taking care of children in this type of situation. You also want to educate yourself about addiction and some of the other things that are taking place, especially when it comes to manipulation. If you are dealing with neglect, you are dealing with alcohol abuse or drug abuse, you want to be educated, in my book, specifically about manipulation, because manipulation is one of the hallmarks of this issue that comes up in marriages. And if you allow somebody to lie to you because you want to believe that they're telling the truth, this is still a form of manipulation, and you are coming into agreement with someone lying to you because you want to believe them. Yes, you want to believe your spouse. Yes, you want to love your spouse. Yes, you want to trust your spouse, but you also got to tell you the truth. And if your spouse is obviously lying to you because he or she is trying to cover up the thing that they're hiding from you and the thing they don't want you judging them about, then you have to call them out and let them know you're not going to tolerate their lies. And so for me, you really, really want to get educated on manipulation and putting an end to manipulation. There's also a really good book, y'all. It's called Everything You Were Never Told About Your Alcoholic. And it's written by a man who's using a pen name called Simply Sober. This is a fascinating read. I highly recommend it for anyone who is dealing with alcoholism in their marriage, but it does speak about other forms of addiction as well. Excellent book. And there are tons of resources out here for you to learn and educate yourself about your spouse's addiction. Then you also have Set realistic expectations. The setting of expectations, that is 100% in your power. You know and understand at some point in time when you're dealing with an alcoholic or a drug addicted spouse that this person is going to drop the ball when they're high, or they're going to act a certain way when they're drunk. And if you keep expecting them to show up to do more than what they've shown you they're able to do or willing to do, then you're just going to continue to disappoint yourself and get frustrated. And this is just going to add fuel to the fire when you are having disagreements and conflict in your marriage. And then you want to take breaks when you need to. This one is particularly especially unique in terms of the type of work that we do with families, because going into your respective corner is going to give you the necessary space to just kind of like see where you are in this situation, feel what you're feeling, be honest with yourself about what your needs are and where your needs are not being met. And so taking a break, it could be as simple as, you know, a weekend staycation at a family member's house, or at a hotel, or taking a retreat out with your closest friends, but just getting away. I have seen it as severe as people taking that break through the form of a legal separation and just completely removing themselves from the situation so that they can see the circumstances with a fresh set of eyes. And sometimes being in a completely separate space will allow you that. I'm not advocating for it, and I'm not saying that that's the only way you have to go, but I am saying, like, put all the options on the table when you are in this kind of situation, struggling and beginning to like suffer trauma in your own thinking and in your own responses to the up and downs that come with alcoholism and drug addiction. And explore treatment options with your spouse. At some point in time, you know, it's understood, especially if you go to a support group like Al-Anon, you know, they help you with figuring out ways how to have these conversations with your loved ones when they're ready. Sometimes how to develop that tough love attitude towards your loved ones, allowing people to hit rock bottom. And sometimes we're in the way. Sometimes we're the big fat cushion that's not allowing this person to feel the consequences of their behavior. And so, and finally, maintain hope. We're having this conversation tonight because I want to bring this issue out in front. I want you all to know that this is something that people are dealing with for years in their marriage. People are in marriages 10, 20, 30 years and longer before they are willing to tell the truth about this, because they're ashamed, they're embarrassed, they're hurting, and they're telling themselves it's going to change one day. It's going to change one day. And when you look up and it's been 20 and 30 years and this person is still in that same addictive behavior, hurting you, hurting your kids, not connected with you, and not in tune with what your needs are, having lost touch with you completely, then it's time for you to have a real honest conversation. But I will say, continue to have hope. Continue to know that the realities that we face in our marriages are co-created. Yes, there's the stuff that you do. Yes, there's the stuff that I do. But there's also the stuff that you allow me to do. And there's the stuff that I allow you to do. And we all play a role in managing what we are creating in our families by our acts, our omissions, and our permissions. And so this topic is super duper important, y'all. I want y'all to be blessed and encouraged. And please, for anyone that you know that's suffering or struggling with this issue, it's most important for them to know that they are not alone. They are not alone. And so the little thing that you can do is let them know that you can be a listening ear that's not going to put their business out the streets and encourage them to get support in a place like Al-Anon or another small group where they can be safe and they can talk openly and they can share and they can cry and they can scream and they can holler and they can get some clarity about how to move forward in this situation. If this person that they're married to, like Mrs. H, decides that they love the bottle more than they love their family. And so, with that, I thank you for joining me tonight for He Say, She Say Live. I've heard from a couple of families, y'all, that look like they might be a really good fit for us to actually walk with them together through some of these conversations. And so, keeping in mind how Black folks are, we don't want our business out in the streets. We don't want to be embarrassed. And this is not a place to embarrass. This is a place to heal. This is a place to express. This is a place to be heard. Husbands, hear what your wives are saying. Wives, hear what your husbands are saying. And know that the gender wars stop here at Law for Love. And so, with that, good night to all of you. I love you, and we'll see you next Monday.